All right, so we move from ethics to the sexier world of money laundering in the global art world. I want to just introduce our moderator, Tracey Knuckles. Tracey is a member of the Cultural Assets Management discipline at Bloomberg Associates. And there she helps cities develop strategies for strengthening the creative sector and optimizing its impact through economic development, cultural marketing, and tourism initiatives. So prior to joining Bloomberg, she was the Deputy Commissioner and General Counsel for the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. Before that, she was an Assistant United States Attorney at my home office, the Eastern District of New York. And she served as the Deputy Chief for the Asset Forfeiture Unit. She was in private practice before that. We are thrilled to have our panelists, and I'll let Tracey take it from here. Thanks, Tracey.
Great, thank you, Barrett. And kudos to CAPI for putting art on the agenda. As a former AUSA who's now squarely focused on arts and culture, I will accept art on the agenda even if it's alongside money laundering. So thank you for that. So corruption and money laundering in the global art world. Why are we even talking about it? Well, art is part of popular culture, and more recently, rising art prices, many in excess of over $100 million, and the growing impact of global art and the collectors who buy it have generated great interest. In preparing for the panel, I read a Deloitte study that said that art and collectible wealth held by ultra high net worth individuals alone is predicted to grow from an estimated $1.62 trillion to $2.7 trillion by 2026. So we're talking about lots of wealth. And I think it's probably well known that real estate was the investment of choice for many money launderers, but where is art on the list of things that criminal proceeds might find their way to? And are there vulnerabilities in the art market that might make it especially attractive to money launderers? And is there a regulatory lens that's properly placed on the global art market? Or should that regulation stay with the financial institutions that facilitate transactions? Well, we'll touch upon all of that, and I can't think of two better people to have that conversation with than the folks we're joined by today. So to my left is Sharon Cohen-Levin. She is widely recognized as an expert on money laundering law, particularly as it relates to terrorist financing, art's role in money laundering, and asset forfeiture. Much of her expertise was acquired over her long service in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where she served as the chief of the Money Laundering and Asset Forfeiture Unit for 19 years. For her diligent work in these roles, Sharon has been recognized with numerous awards over her career, including being named one of the 75 most accomplished female attorneys in 2015 by the National Law Journal. She's currently a partner at Wilmer Hale. To my right is Jane Levine. Jane is the Chief Global Compliance Counsel and Head of Government and Regulatory Affairs at Sotheby's. She's based in New York. Before joining Sotheby's, Jane was also a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District, where she worked with the FBI's art crime team. Jane's legal experience includes civil and commercial litigation. She teaches a seminar here at Columbia on art and cultural heritage law. And in 2011, Jane was appointed by then President Obama to serve as a member of the President's Cultural Property Advisory Committee. She frequently writes and speaks about art and cultural heritage law. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
So I thought a good place to start might be to give our colleagues here a sense of the typical art-loving, money laundering defendant and the investigation that leads you to the fine art. So maybe Sharon...
Who is not a client of Sotheby's, of course.
Maybe you could give us a sense of where you might begin or where you have begun in former investigations as part of the Southern District.
Sure. I mean, the thing about art is that, I mean, in terms of money laundering, to actually the vision that people have of money laundering, or drug dealers coming in with big bags of cash and, counting machines and switching it over and taking it and being able to secretly move money through the U.S. financial system. And that is one kind of money laundering, but actually the money laundering laws are very broad, and it includes literally spending any crime proceeds. If you are a criminal, you get money from one of 200 different federal and state crimes, and you just buy even like a Snickers bar with that money, that could be money laundering. So if you're a criminal, particularly often white-collar criminals, you have gotten money, the crimes are committed, to get money, and now you're becoming fabulously wealthy. What is the ultimate thing to purchase with that money? I see two things: yachts and art. And art is more, because art to us is more than just, like an expensive thing, a piece of jewelry. Art is a sign of culture. It's a sign of your prominence, etc. So it's going to be a very, very valuable commodity. But what's important to note is it's not going to be the person that's buying art, that criminal that's going to be that art-loving defendant, is not going to look like a criminal defendant. They are going to look like someone that is extraordinarily prominent, the head of a bank, a very successful lawyer. I'll tell you about two cases that I worked on which provide sort of good examples of how art can be used for money laundering. The first one is a lawyer in New York. His name was Mark Dreyer, very prominent, Harvard, Yale. He headed up a 200-person law firm in Manhattan, appeared to be very, very successful. Somewhere along the way, he lost his direction, and he started off by stealing money from his clients, and then he got involved in some crazy scheme where he was selling fake real estate notes to the biggest hedge funds in New York. And as part of that, he hired people to impersonate officials at this real estate company and did all different kinds of crazy things with it. But what did he do? He bought a yacht. He bought 2 houses in the Hamptons on the ocean right next to each other, and he got an enormous art collection. He literally had an art advisor on staff, and he just bought tons and tons of art. So if he goes to an auction house, he goes to an art dealer, he's the head of a 200-person law firm in New York. He appears to be incredibly successful. He's incredibly philanthropic. No AML program is going to be able to identify that this guy is a criminal. He's just going to look like a successful art lover. And then on top of what else he did with the art, he actually, when things were sort of falling apart, he used it as collateral for some of his loans. He placed it as collateral. So, he even used the art in committing his, securities fraud and money laundering offenses. So that's one defendant, and that's how he sort of used the art, purchased it, and used it in his money laundering. The other one was a case out of Brazil. Edmar Cid Ferreira, he headed up a bank there, Banco Santos, appeared to be on the surface very, very prominent. Head of a huge bank in Brazil. Again, doesn't look like someone you would think is a defendant. What he did is he embezzled $200 million from the bank, and what he did with some of that money is he set up an incredible modern art collection, went on trial, was convicted. Brazil had forfeiture laws. They forfeited his entire collection, and when the Brazilian police went to seize that collection, it was all gone. It had been sold and put in the name, or sold, but it was transferred to all different kinds of shell companies, and the art was moved throughout the world. A couple of pieces, ultimately many pieces, ended up in New York, but the sort of most prominent one was a Basquiat Hannibal that was worth about $8 million at the time. And it was easily able to enter the United States because if you're familiar with the work of Basquiat, someone that's not familiar with the work of Basquiat, for example, a Customs and Border Patrol inspector, may believe what was on the declaration, that it was a painting by an unknown artist worth less than $100. So it ends up within New York, and what happened was, and this is the role of asset forfeiture, a forfeiture action was brought against that piece to recover it and return it to essentially the victims of the Banco Santos fraud. But again, these are just two examples of sort of how art is such a valuable commodity and can be used in connection with money laundering.
And it's funny, in telling both of those, telling us about those cases, you have highlighted, I think, some of the common challenges or vulnerabilities that are talked about vis-a-vis the art market. You're talking about a high net worth crowd, perhaps an expectation of customer privacy, easily movable assets. I want to turn to Jane and sort of talk through some of the things that are a natural part of the art market, but may be challenges for AML efforts.
Sure. Well, in both of the examples that Sharon just gave, while, you have two criminals who were spending the proceeds of their specified unlawful activity, I think what we used to call it, it's sort of in what we used to call the integration phase of the money laundering. And as Sharon put it, they have already stolen the funds and have put it into the financial system, and often have moved it so many times that by the time it comes to the retail market, whether it's the luxury high end of the art market or a Snickers bar, it can be impossible, despite the best due diligence and the most rigorous, robust AML program, to detect anything amiss. And so that, that's not a challenge that I think is unique at all to the art market. I think that is one of the problems of this conference. How do we protect the financial system from being injected with criminal funds? And I'd like to tell a little story about another case, which many of you may have read about, another alleged criminal who liked to buy art, a man named Joe Lowe, related to the 1MDB scandal. And I did bring a prop. Tracy wanted us to have pictures, but I'm bringing this 500-page forfeiture complaint.
All right.
And there's 30 of them.
Which is the first one, because there are many of them, and you can see I read it, every night. But, and there was a lot of talk about Joe Lowe coming both to Sotheby's and Christie's buying art which was forfeited. We cooperated extensively with the government in that investigation, but we got a lot of criticism. He did many things. He made The Wolf of Wall Street. He bought hotels and property, but the art seemed to get everyone's attention. How could this happen? It's the corrupt art market. But if you read the complaint, you see, way back in 2009. When Joe Lowe, and this is all alleged, but when the billions of dollars were coming into the 1MDB wealth fund, he had to move it into a bank account. And the crime that took place, which is where I think we should be focusing our efforts, is when, there was an official from the fund on the phone with the compliance person at the bank. And they're pressuring the compliance person to say, it's okay to move $1 billion into this account, which of course the account was, held by the bad guys. In fact, held by Joe Lowe. And there's a conversation where, and this is as a compliance lawyer, where I think the problem is, the official is saying, I'm under tremendous pressure. Tell your compliance person, if they don't send the money, we will blame them if this deal goes off. If they're going to overkill on this compliance thing, they're going to be responsible for killing this deal. And then there are lies told about what the money was for. And that pressure worked. The money's in the bank. And then the rest, there's 500 pages of what happened, but by the time it comes, he's not hiding, he's not confidential. He's standing in the auction room, wanting people to pay attention to him. So, it's a challenge for the art market to sort of catch this. And anyway, the banking system is where we really need to, I think, focus our effort.
Sure. But despite, I guess, the regulations that apply to the banking system, which are many at this point, there aren't many, if any, regulations that apply to dealers, auction houses in the U.S. And it would be good to know from you, Jane, what efforts Sotheby's and colleagues of yours are putting in place despite, not having a legal obligation to do so.
Well, let me just start out by saying that the anti-money laundering laws do apply to us. You don't need to be regulated, especially as a financial institution, to know that you're prohibited from laundering funds. So we have an extensive anti-money laundering compliance program, and consider ourselves regulated in that sense. So, that's something, a baseline important for people to understand. What we are, right now, the art market, and art market participants are not, within the scope of the Bank Secrecy Act. There is a proposal pending right now. In fact, the House Financial Services Committee approved a bill that would apply the Bank Secrecy Act to antiquities dealers, amending the definition, a new Z is always the last one added, to add antiquities dealers, not the whole art market yet. And in Europe, there is, the European Union has already, in the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, included the art market as an obliged entity, so you have to register. So what are some of the things we do, and we think many of the big players do already? Of course, we identify our clients. We have KYC, know your customer rules. We usually have a lot of information about the people we're dealing with. It is usually a very hands-on transaction, so we do understand their source of wealth. We're not taking cash, so nobody's driving up to the loading dock with a truck of cash to buy a $50 million painting. It's coming, through banks in regulated AML jurisdictions. We keep the FATF list. We have a sanctions compliance program as well. So, we're taking all the steps you would expect a bank to take.
Sure. But I guess as an auction house, you might also have concerns about the chilling effect on the art market. I can't imagine that Mark Dreyer would mind paying an extra $50,000 for a painting with laundered funds. I mean, they're not actually concerned about value so much. But talk about valuation a bit, both from the prosecutorial side and then from the market side. Auction houses have clear methodologies for valuation of paintings, but how does that work? Both sides of the coin on that issue.
I mean, the thing about art that's unique is that its value it's not going to be like a security where it's publicly traded and you can see what it is, though. So so it's not necessarily so concrete. The value is going to be what someone is willing to pay for it. But oftentimes, the fact that somebody's willing to pay a lot of money for something doesn't have a nefarious reason for it. They could either be just really a visionary and see that this is an artist that's going to take off. It could be for personal reasons. It's just something that's really valuable to round off their collection. There was the Leonardo da Vinci painting that recently sold for, I guess not that recently, but for over $450 million, where I think it was estimated to go for $100 million. Why it sold for so much more money? I mean, supposedly it was bought by the Saudi royal family, so, that at least is a source where you can identify where the funds come from. So there is that aspect of it. You're 100% right that, in general, the fact that someone wants to pay more money, criminals don't care about the price because it's not really their money. So there is that. But I think in the art market that can get somewhat clouded because there are so many other motivations that people have where that might be suspicious if you were, going to be going in and buying like a bunch of widgets and someone said, you know what, I'm going to pay 3 times the price for it, where you could get it somewhere else. But art is one of one. And so why someone gets it, that's why it makes it sort of not so suitable for that kind of broad regulation. If I can just sort of step back a little bit to talk a little bit about what Jane said about about regulation in general and the responsibilities in terms of the art market. I mean, there are sort of two sets of laws that oftentimes get confused. There are actually what they call, and it's very funny because in the government, everything is like the money laundering unit. Now in private practice, everything is about anti-money laundering, which would seem like it should maybe be flipped, but that's how it is. So in terms of like the money laundering laws, they're criminal offenses under Title 18 of the U.S. Code that make it a crime to like engage in financial transactions with crime proceeds. There are also what they call the anti-money laundering laws that fall under the Bank Secrecy Act, the literally worst named law in the entire world, because you think it's about keeping things confidential. It's literally about banks ratting out their customers. So sort of the anti-Bank Secrecy Act. But under the Bank Secrecy Act, there are certain obligations imposed upon what's designated as a financial institution. And the talk is about taking an auction house or an art dealer. And an art dealer can be like Sharon's, like art shop down the street that sells a couple of things. It could be Sotheby's, it could be Gagosian Gallery, or it could be like a very small business, but treating them like they are a financial institution. And those regulations that would be promulgated under there impose obligations on a financial institution, which includes having a system of internal controls, having independent testing to make sure everything works, to require training of personnel, to have like a AML compliance, anti-money laundering compliance officer.
Possibly to file SARs.
Right, file suspicious activity reports, and to sort of know who their customers are. A lot of these businesses do anyway because your defense, if you're in a situation like, for example, Jolo is one of your customers, your defense to a charge that you could be involved in money laundering is that you have a reasonable risk-based program. You looked at, you did your due diligence, and criminals are liars. They get by. They can do it. It happened for Jolo all throughout the financial system. He tricked the banks. I mean, if you read the complaint, it's horrible. There's law firms in there. There's, he was negotiating to buy a stake in Adidas when this thing unfolded. So, I mean, he owned hotels, the Viceroy hotel chain. So there was a lot of people that were fooled by that. But these requirements that would be imposed are likely for most businesses, and I do a lot of work advising companies, not just financial institutions, on setting up anti-money laundering programs. So if they end up getting tricked and they end up in the middle of one of these transactions, and I will say law firms too, my law firm has a anti-money laundering policy. If they end up in a situation, that's their defense. We did everything we could. We weren't willfully blind to what was going on. The other big risk in the financial system is to violate like sanctions, to engage in terrorist financing. But those regulations don't just apply to financial institutions, they apply to everybody. So Sotheby's as a US person cannot deal with a terrorist organization, or they have committed a criminal offense, and it applies to individuals too. So a lot of what's out there under the regulations are sort of already required under the law or are being done voluntarily. I hope I sort of did a little tangent there.
No, that's really helpful because suspicious activity reports and much of the things that are required by the BSA are the places where these investigations start with your federal law enforcement officers. So they're key certainly to financial investigations, but you don't often see auction houses, maybe if ever, being convicted of money laundering offenses, which means that Jane's doing a great job at her work.
That's what I like.
But maybe there's more to be said about the burdens of the BSA and things like that for businesses like yours or much smaller dealers.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny. Ironically, Sharon was making the argument that the regulation under the BSA may not be the best thing or the most effective thing, whereas, we're sort of agnostic at Sotheby's. In fact, we're not opposed to it. The burden wouldn't add to the burden that I have every day in my job because we already do it. There is a view, and we don't have anybody up here representing the sort of the galleries or the dealers, smaller businesses, and I have heard a lot of talk about people complaining that this is going to overburden the art market and it's going to impose cost, an administrative cost, it's going to be really hard and sort of be negative for the U.S. art market. And I guess maybe this is my response is, first of all, if it's a risk-based program, it need not be that burdensome. And, I'm a compliance lawyer. I believe in compliance, and I think we shouldn't look at having compliance programs as a drag or a cost, but as an advantage. Isn't it a good thing to have a clean market and a marketplace where we're all agreed that it's a good thing to prevent money launderers if we can? So I'm kind of speaking the gospel of this isn't really so terrible, and compliance, isn't a necessary evil. It should be something to be embraced, but of course it should be proportional. And look, I think what we're dancing around in the commentary about the regs is that, and our comment about the examples, there's a question of whether the art market is a place that a criminal would go really to, if you go back to the elements, to, disguise or conceal, the nature, source, origin, location of the funds. And I think the answer to that is generally, no, not really. It's really not a good market to do that in. It's not really hospitable to trade-based money laundering. It's my view. You can't really name your price. There are people out there who know what the art is worth. That's their jobs. It's not a stock, but there are comparables. I can't go in and just say, I want, to sell my Picasso for $10 million because it's a Picasso. I mean, there's a value that gets put on that. So you can't guarantee, it's so volatile. You have no guarantee you're going to get your money out of the investment that you make. I think that's part of why I think the regulation leaves a lot of people cold. Is it going to be effective to do anything to prevent what we want to get
Can
at?
you talk more about sort of the risk assessment or risk profile that you're using, be it for the artwork or the individual buyer, where their funds are coming from?
Well, so there are two sides of the transaction. We're a broker. We act as an agent for the seller in most of our transactions. So risk profile, a person comes in to offer something to consign to us. We do a lot of research on what is the thing that you're bringing. We don't want to lose money, so we have a vested interest in knowing, is it authentic? Do you have good title? Where'd you get it? What's it worth? Who are you? So there's a lot of natural research that goes in. It isn't even driven by compliance, but it's just good business. And so, if we've hit any number of risks in that inquiry, the red flags could come up. And, many, many times we turn people away if we're not comfortable. On the buy side, it's a little harder, right? Because people are coming in right before the sale, to bid, and we don't have that same opportunity to kind of really vet them. But we have you have to register. We have a registration process, and we're getting information. And if you are a successful bidder, we're going to only take money from you, not a third party. We're not going to take money from a sanctioned bank or a bank that has no visible connection to you. We will ask questions. So, we also have an interest in making sure if you're bidding at a certain level, we kind of have some kind of bank reference for you because we want you to pay. We want to be able to deliver the money. So there are pressure points in our business that give us a natural ability to kind of flush out red flags.
Gotcha. So for the smaller dealer who is not of the size or capacity of a Sotheby's, and let's say we don't get to the point where the Bank Secrecy Act is yet applying to the smaller dealer, what would you recommend, or what would you think might be helpful in AML efforts beyond considering that smaller dealer much like a financial institution? What would they be doing if they can't do what Jane is doing at Sotheby's in terms of the risk assessment, but what would be a meaningful substitute for that?
Well, I mean, the whole part of the anti-money laundering system and really I think the prevention of money laundering system is always going to be, it's going to be risk-based. If you're selling something for, for $10, you're going to have it's going to be a different dynamic. You're going to look at things a different way. But even if you're a small gallery, you should be applying sort of, and there's lots of different initiatives by trade associations or other groups to set up sort of responsible practices in the art market. But generally, the keys are, for the risk of money laundering, it's all going to come from the money that's coming in. So all of the other due diligence on the seller and all of that is going to be important in some ways, but the biggest risk is going to be who the buyer is. So the number one thing is, if the money is coming from a financial institution, there is a lot more credibility there. Somebody that wants to pay, if they want to, even if you're a small gallery and you don't have the no third-party payment policy that most auction houses have, is to be very wary of a third-party payment. You want to know who it is, where the money's coming from. If it's coming from an offshore jurisdiction, looking. So all different kinds of public lists on like what jurisdictions have high risk of corruption, money laundering. Be wary of any money that's going to be ultimately flowing through their jurisdictions. Be wary of any kind of strange payments. One of the other things to look at, part of the problem with what Mark Dreyer was doing was he was actually making payments directly from his attorney escrow account. That should have been for all different things. I don't know if he was buying the art that way, but lots of things were being bought. Well, actually, I do know that he bought the art that way, because just a little side note here. One of the things that he did was there was something that he wanted to buy, and he didn't have the money available. So he literally was someone in his firm was representing the creditors committee of a bankruptcy, and they just took the bankruptcy money and used it to buy some of the art. So, be wary of those kind of things. If you're seeing money that's coming from like a fiduciary account, lots of, we've seen, particularly in corruption cases, there were cases that I was there where we did forfeitures where it was the fiduciary for labor unions that was all of a sudden like buying things that made no sense. So, to look at where the money's come from, the source. If it's coming from a U.S. financial institution, they are required to have a anti-money laundering program. They have all different kinds of algorithms and transaction monitoring systems to do that. So if it's coming from a U.S. institution, that's going to provide some more credibility, but it's also common sense things, looking at red flags. There's all different kinds of red flags that are published for the art market, things that just don't make sense. So, what they can do, I always say to any type of organization, any kind of, major company or small one, have a formal anti-money laundering policy. Have somebody look at it. If you see a suspicious transaction, even if you don't have a formal suspicious activity reporting regime, what you can do is literally call up the law, call not the police, but call the DA's office, call the U.S. Attorney's office, call the FBI and say, we see something suspicious, we want to tell you about it. That's absolutely a proper way to report suspicious activity. So there are a lot of things that you can do to protect your institution from literally being willfully blind, which equals knowledge, and allowing property to be laundered through even your very small art gallery.
Very helpful. Can you both talk a little bit about maybe parallel industries that maybe face the same challenges and are doing a good job at addressing money laundering, and given our international audience, if there are international parallels that might be helpful to speak about?
I mean, I'm happy to start in terms of one of the industries that I actually work a lot with is the gaming or casino industry. Talk about having a bad reputation. They are seen in all over the 1MDB complaint are casinos. Because what did Jolo do besides buying art? He took his buddies on private jets and gambled at all of the different casinos. So, but in that place, they're financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. They have they have reporting requirements, and it's generally based on the amount of money they earn per year, over $1 million. Most gaming institutions are going to be covered. But they have a very, very active trade association that I represent, so that's how I know so much about it, not to give a plug for it. I doubt we have people in the casino industry here. But what happened was a few years ago, the Department of Treasury was really calling out the casino industry and saying there is so much money laundering going on. This is like a terrible industry. And they were really on the hook, and they created a best practices guide where they went through and they put together common typologies, red flags, et cetera, and all different types of procedures, and really did a lot of outreach to the Division of the Department of Treasury, FinCEN, which oversees the Bank Secrecy Act, to work cooperatively with them to be able to report to their, member institutions what was going on, and also to have like a hotline to law enforcement agencies so that if they saw things that were suspicious, they could report them. I'm not saying that, all casinos get it right, many don't, and they bring actions against them all the time. But I think that in general, that type of trade association working together, and particularly coming up with those best practices for its members, really, I don't know if there were problems in the industry before, but certainly the perception of the industry from law enforcement has really changed as a result.
Helpful. Jane, any industry parallels or international?
Well, before I get to a parallel, I'll just add that, and I mentioned this before, but in the European Union, under the fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive, the art market is now, within the scope, and there is something called the British Art Market Federation, BAMF, which is a trade association that actually doesn't have a parallel here in the U.S., mostly because Sotheby's and Christie's are really gun-shy to speak to each other after that antitrust matter. But on lobbying matters, of course, we can collaborate. But there is sort of a similar, and there's a lot of discussion going on in BAMF and with Treasury, just on a parallel track to what Sharon is describing in the gambling and casino industry, where they're talking to them about the regs and how they can make sense. In terms of another parallel industry, people often think of jewelry as it's not really art, but it is a collectible. We sell jewelry. The jewelry is on the list of financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. FinCEN has issued regulations. Whether that's working or not, jewelry is something that is probably, or gems, precious stones, is probably more susceptible to what they call trade-based money laundering because they can be more commodity-like than a unique Basquiat. Whether it's effective or not, I'm really not in a position to say, but I do know that is a piece of the market that has been regulated for a while.
Sure. Well, but before we open it up to questions, I want you each to comment on sort of what's next. We've spent a lot of time talking about sort of the fraud, white-collar defendant who buys art. Where else are you seeing lots of money coming and perhaps finding its way to the art market? And for Jane, what's sort of next on the horizon in your work with Sotheby's and protecting your company from sort of the funds that might be coming your way?
I think in terms of, the crime, I think there's going to be a lot of focus now in particular on money coming from overseas, money coming from other jurisdictions, particularly countries where the U.S. there are wealthy people and the U.S. may have some kind of sanctions program against them. I think that underlying a lot of this, all of these problems are the role of shell companies and the fact that the U.S. doesn't have a beneficial ownership directory. So what's happened is because you can buy things, because you can do business through, shell companies and conceal who the actual owner is, who the purchaser is, and put up sort of nominees that look like they own the company. I think this in the United States creates a really easy outlet for criminals to come in, either people violating sanctions or others that are engaged in criminal activity to be able to move through all different places in the U.S. financial system. The release, that leak of the Panama Papers, which was a data leak from a Panamanian law firm that set up all of these shell companies. And it was fascinating. Like, if you were in the space and you started looking at it, there were lots of legitimate people, actors that bought things and owned things through shell companies. But there were also lots of criminals that were doing that were coming in, that should have been banned from the U.S. in general, but through shell companies, they were buying property in the United States. I don't know that I think there might have been some art, but in particular, they were holding real estate purchases in the United States, even though they were barred from, doing any kind of business in the United States or doing anything in the U.S. So I think that is one of the real focuses right now. There's a lot of debate in Congress about having either to make it public so that businesses can participate, or for law enforcement to have a directory of any of these companies that are set up in the United States in the name of shell companies, where law enforcement can see who actually is the owner without having to go through like 14 million steps to be able to figure that out. So I think that until there is something like that, it's always going to be easy, whether it's through the art market, which actually, looks at it more quickly, even financial institutions that have the responsibility to identify who the beneficial owner is. But without that, it's going to still be easy for criminals to be able to access the U.S. financial system.
I actually couldn't agree more, and I was actually going to say that. So Sharon and I know each other so well. No, Carolyn Maloney has a bill right now pending to bring the United States in line with the rest of the world on this issue, although in the current bill, it will not be available publicly, only to law enforcement, but at least it's something. But that is a big issue. You can try, even banks can try to identify the ultimate beneficial owner, and ultimately you just have to rely on what you're told, because there is no documentation of it, and so you can only do what you can do. And I think that's not unique to the art market. That's definitely a problem. We try to drill down into it and ask the question. At least asking the question is a step that some people don't take. So at least we're doing that. And then in terms of what's next, one thing that we're probably going to move into, and this is a function of our size, but there are more data-based ways to take a look at, notice trends. A lot more is done online, and while that presents a potential non-face-to-face, it also provides actually an opportunity, because you can control and collect data and block people from going to the next step, and then amass and run a lot of, there's a lot of cool software and data-based analysis you can do. And I think that is the next move probably in some parts of the art market, is to try to the banks are doing it. We're not as big, but that can be helpful in flagging some things.
Great. Well, I want to open it up to questions from the audience. If you have one, let us know. If you could say where you're from, it'd be helpful. Yes, right here.
Do I need my lawyer to? No. Because I have them all here. Well, let me be clear. I don't have access to bank records of anyone really, and we don't make it a condition of sale that open up your bank records to us. I think that would probably not go over well I'd be out of a job if I suggested that as a policy. But we do what we need. We want to get to understand source of wealth. There's an obligation if someone's a politically exposed person, then we have to do that kind of enhanced due diligence. But just for somebody coming to transact to make a sale, you know, we have to, we want to understand who is this person and where did they buy, how did they come to possess the artwork. But that, you know, that can be, you know, I inherited it from my grandmother, or they bought it, that, can I see the invoice? I mean, you know, there's a limit to how much we can penetrate into, like, what money did you use to buy that and where did it come from?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm actually not talking about the seller, the buyer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I understand.
The buy side, the money comes in usually by wire transfer, and so, you know, we have a, you know, if it's coming in from a country bank on our FATF list, you know, our post-sale people catch that. That usually results in a phone call to someone in my group. And, you know, we have to work through, is this okay or not okay? Sometimes we tell people, you need to pay us in a different way, or we're canceling the sale. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but like, we don't, you know, we can, it's not easy to see where the money's coming in, because, you know, the records that we get from the banks are not always actually telling us the true origin of the bank, the origination bank. Believe it or not, we don't always get that, and so, you know, it's there are a lot of ways things can fall through the cracks, but at least we have a program to try to catch that, and if we do, then we can deal with it.
If I could just add something to that, sort of on the other perspective, is it's interesting in terms of the bank. So the bank, obviously Sotheby's has a bank relationship. There's a bank where the money is going to, you know, the bank, it doesn't come to Sotheby's, it goes bank to bank. But the banks that I do a lot of representation of banks, but for banks, like Sotheby's is now kind of moving into more of a high-risk customer. So Sotheby's has to answer a lot of questions to its bank about what are your anti-money laundering policies, what are you doing to know who your customer is, because Sotheby's customer is ultimately going to affect the bank, so they need to know that. But and the banks also have much better access to be able to, there are procedures under the Bank Secrecy Act for banks to share information, like they'll cut Sotheby's out, but if a suspicious wire transfer comes in, Sotheby's Bank may do a request under one of the sections of the Patriot Act to the transfer bank. Who did this come from? Give me information. We think this is suspicious. And so that's actually a way with cutting Sotheby's out. That transaction might actually be then reported to law enforcement. But if Sotheby's has a lot of those type of things where there's suspicious transactions, Sotheby's could lose their banking relationship. So obviously that's going to be important. So it's funny, like banks are kind of...
Not while Jane's around.
Not while Jane's around.
But it's as if Sharon has my phone tapped, because, no, because I do spend a bit of time answering what I think are absurd questions from banks. They're asking me about my AML, and I'm like, you're the one that took the money and sent it to us. You have the ability, and you are, you know, you're the bank, you're supposed to know this. How do I, you know, it's absurd, but you're absolutely right.
It's like it's a weird system where it's like the banks are now turning to their customers and saying, you need to police your customers, which are going to be our customers.
Like, they didn't call us up and say, you know, we're going to send you dirty money. It's kind of come from a sanctioned bank in Latvia. Okay, just want to give you the heads up. You know, it comes in, and our bank sends it to us, and we're the ones that usually are like, whoa, what's this? And then they want to know, what is your AML policy? It's crazy.
Right. It's like the banks have really turned into, particularly with so many different cases being brought against banks for, you know, violating the Bank Secrecy Act, they've turned into their own set of mini regulators that are looking at their any client that has a lot of, you know, clients, they're in there evaluating their programs.
And they do this de-risking, which I think is controversial also. They'll just say, we don't want the headache of having to talk to Jane Levine again about her AML program. We're just not taking any money from a certain population or from certain places. And not all of that's illegitimate. And that becomes a problem for, I think, legitimate commerce. So it's like the overkill, de-risking as a solution it can be problematic too.
Yes. Other questions?
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? So what happens if a buyer comes in and is from an established legitimate bank, the buyer's name checks out, there's no red flag or anything, and then it comes time to ship, and you're like, all right, where do you want
That would be a no.
Or a company in Dubai that's like, has no established presence other than that they're like a transshipper or something like that. Is there any process in place to sort of, once it's gone all the way through to catch, like at the last possible moment before it goes out, other sort of sanctions flags?
Well, if your question is about sanctions, yes, we have programs to catch. Shipping and any transactions involving any of the sanctioned countries. I'd like to think we'd catch that and would not stumble into that. Shipping is an interesting question. We don't always ship. People arrange their own shipping. So usually, I think if people are using the work of art in some way that they want to hide it, they don't ask us to do the shipping. They can arrange their own shipping, and we don't have any control over that. People and dealers and collectors do ship art internationally, and it's not, every transaction's not an opportunity to conduct a big investigation. So unless, there's really something suspicious, in my world, it's very international. It's not necessarily going to raise a red flag because some very wealthy, ultra-high net worth person wants to have a work sent to Switzerland, and they have 12 homes all over the place. It's just not necessarily a red flag.
The other thing that happens in this space is that what can happen is someone will come into an auction house or to a gallery and they'll buy a work of art, and they'll know in their head that they're going to sell it to somebody else. They're actually buying from Sotheby's or whoever is dealing with them's perspective. It's going to look like a sale to that person because you don't have to tell what your future plans are for that work, but they could actually be buying it, particularly for Russian oligarchs or, maybe less for people in Iran, but there's definitely categories of people that want access to this that are not able to, go in and directly buy it. So they may have people that they've hired or just other people that are more unscrupulous that are going to buy them and then subsequently sell it. It may be 3 steps down the line, but the person doing the direct business isn't going to know that because that's part of the scheme, is to keep them in the dark. So that's what's tricky, and that's the one thing about art that's say different than real estate or other property or banks, where the product can move, the product can move around, and it's not like there's a tracking device on it, so you're going to see where it is. So that's what makes it tricky, but it's no different than if you go into Bloomingdale's and you buy a fur coat and then you turn around and resell it to somebody else. Bloomingdale's wouldn't be responsible for knowing who they're going to ultimately resell the fur coat to.
Although, having said that, we do have, and that's exactly right too, but we have in our conditions of sale, I hope it's there in the catalog, it's a representation that you are not, effectively, I'm not going to give you the quote, but you are not acting on behalf of an SDN or, it's just a rep, and it's worth what it is, but it's in there. And
Have you ever had to act on representation of that kind?
Well, no. Meaning, have I ever acted? Well, we haven't learned that someone actually is acting as a front or a nominee. Whether or not, as Sharon said, somebody buys something and then resells it illegally, we have no control over that. That's probably happened, but I don't know about it.
Other questions? Yes.
This is not necessarily related to money laundering, but let's say if we have this antiquity item moved from a conflict zone with unclear provenance and it goes through Sotheby's, finds a buyer, and let's say ultimately if the Department of Justice gets involved, trace down this item, seize it, repatriate it, would that also affect Sotheby's bank relations besides money laundering activities?
Hypothetically speaking. Well, let's not wade in at the 12:15 into antiquities, but that probably doesn't. That's not necessarily going to affect our banking relationship. It's an issue. When we're in the news a lot and people are critical of our business, we don't like that, and it affects the general relationship. But the banks are asking more questions about the kinds of things we're talking about here today. They're very concerned about sanctions and money laundering and corruption. more so than other aspects of the art market. That's just my experience. And I think that's appropriate. I'm not sure that that issue is a banking issue. It's a different issue.
Yes, right here.
I'm just curious. I'm a retired minister of government, and so I'm approached probably 4 times a year by people who have private art for sale. And I've always turned it down because the assumption always is there a pedigree? Why do you need to do this for you? Why can't you go to Sotheby's or whatever? But I mean, is that sort of a general red flag for money laundering, or are there really any legitimate reasons why someone would want to not go to an auction house to do a private sale and approach someone like myself?
Well, it's hard for me to answer in the abstract. When you're saying people who are asking you
Yes.
to.
Because I know lots of people all around.
To be a
Well-
broker?
To be a broker.
Okay.
Right. Is there any legitimate reason for...
There could. So look, I can't speak to the particular instances without knowing more, but there are many reasons people, whether they're collectors or dealers, would prefer to sell a work privately versus at auction. We do, and but and then there are other reasons that people in the art market would prefer to sell privately through dealers rather than Sotheby's Christie's or a major auction house. That's, I mean, I can't see the reason they would do that. Of course, they should come to us. But they're whatever. We're big. We have lots of people. Some people value privacy and confidentiality in what they consider their private lives, and some of that's legit, and sometimes it's not. And so I think just in and of itself, it's hard to draw a conclusion. That's we talk a lot about that, the confidentiality in the art market, and there are many different kinds of people in the market, and some collectors are want their names plastered all over the marketing, and the catalog should be about them. They don't want to hide their identity. They want a single owner sale just for me, and other people, for legitimate reasons, don't want anybody to know that they had to sell the Monet on the wall. Like they don't want publicity. It's their private. They don't want anyone to know about their financial affairs, and they're really rely on us to keep it confidential from the public, but not from us. But so it's hard to tell. Just.
Okay, so
I mean, it's a little odd if you're not an art person. Maybe they think rich people who would be interested in buying it. I don't know.
You're also a politically exposed person, so that you would be someone that would raise red flags. So
wait, sorry.
Yeah.
I have to ask you a question. Am I politically exposed the rest of my life?
pretty much. But Jane and I, as former government officials, are technically, one of my partners was identified by their bank. They were disclosed by their bank that they were a politically exposed person. It was like completely freaked out. They're like, what does that mean? I'm like, it means that you were a former government official. That's all. Yeah.
Was there a question over here? Yes.
You both talked about the need for and the existence of formal in-house anti-money laundering programs. Are there ways that auction houses and dealers and other participants in the market are trying to encourage a culture more informally of seeing compliance as good business rather than a burden or a roadblock, or are you relying on the formal rules-based systems to prevent that?
Okay, that's my life, is talking about culture of compliance. I mean, I can only speak for what we're doing. I feel like I've become like an organizational psychologist since I left the government, because so much of the compliance program and the work that, when you do compliance for as long as I have, you start to realize that it really is all about culture and attitudes. And, you can have as many rules, wonderful policies in place, but you really need to have buy-in and belief, and the culture has to be in favor of it. And so we do spend a lot of time, trying to promote that in the company, and I think that is really where it's at. Without the culture, it's really a losing battle.
And I think for just my experience with the industry, I think that is something that is definitely, even the smaller ones, the associations, very much want to promote that. One, because, they don't necessarily want formal regulation, but you can have all the formal regulation in the world. It's not going to, if you don't have it, that it's a value there. unfair because law enforcement isn't everywhere and isn't going to see everything that happens. So if you don't have that, if you're not making the right decisions to do it, and it may be that culture of compliance isn't just for people because you're a good person and you don't want to do it, but at the end of the day, if you end up being caught up in one of these, it costs a lot of money. You have to hire a lawyer. Even if you're just a witness, you have to respond to a subpoena. That costs a lot of money to do. It takes a lot of time. And if you end up caught up in one of these big complaints, there's tremendous reputational harm that you're sort of called out by the government, maybe really unfairly as like a money launderer, even though you didn't do anything wrong. So I think that plays into the calculus of why institutions are going to want to have these programs, even if they're not legally required to.
Other questions? Yes.
With the emergence of the cryptocurrencies, I was wondering how auction houses and the companies, despite the anti-laundering policies they adopted, could even the illicit acquisition of art or being by
Well, I'm only laughing because when a few years ago, cryptocurrency was all anyone wanted to talk about, and we kind of gave some thought to whether or not we would accept it, and we decided not to. So we don't accept cryptocurrency. We don't trade in cryptocurrency or accept it. But that's a huge issue, and even when we were considering it. We would not have taken the cryptocurrency, we would have taken the cash from the cryptocurrency exchange, and only a regulated one under the DFS rules. But I think I think there probably are some places in the art market where they may be more likely to do that, but I don't think we're seeing it at the big houses yet. And it's going to be a challenge. I think it's a challenge.
I mean, the New York, any cryptocurrency exchange that's licensed, that has a BIT license under New York state law, has to have an anti-money laundering program. And, in general, any one of them is going to fall under the definition of a money transmitter under, one that's operating in the U.S. under U.S. law, that's going to be required to then have an anti-money laundering program. But most major financial institutions are, stepping very gingerly in terms of dealing with cryptocurrency. I've done a lot of work with, crypto exchanges, and coming up with an effective anti-money laundering program due to the nature of it is very, very challenging.
Yeah, that's exactly. We did lots of research into it, and they claim that there could be more effective ways because of the data and the way they can trace it on the blockchain. But at the end of the day, you come to a point where, it's a token and you don't really know who's behind it, and it's kind of creepy.
And the real risk is, for all of this is, while money laundering is a problem and you want to stop that, et cetera, but sanctions violations are strict liability. So if it turned out that Sotheby's sold, even with the best of intentions and the best program, actually, sold something to somebody on the SDN list, then that is a violation, and then Christie's has to demonstrate why. There's a whole matrix that OFAC has, but why they should just get a notice or a cautionary letter, but that it wouldn't be a real violation. But that, again, would be very expensive to deal with, and to, if they're going to have to make that disclosure to OFAC. So the idea is, for sanctions, most institutions take that extraordinarily seriously because it's strict liability.
One more question?
Lunch.
Yeah, we're all that stands between you and lunch. So, Barrett, I'm just going to take my liberties and thank Jane and Sharon for an interesting panel.
Okay, thank you for having me.